Well, thank you everyone for coming today. We have a really good turnout. We're looking forward to offering a great program on the Bracero Program here in Dixon that had been in Dixon from 1942 to 1964. We're very pleased to be able to offer this program to you today, and we've got 3 speakers. That is Maria Cornejo Lopez, Tom Galindo, and Fred Berry.
All right, good afternoon, and welcome to today's presentation on the Bracero Program. I was looking forward to doing this, and it took me a little bit of persuasion by our 2 co-presenters to get me to this point where I'm now going to provide you the information that I have discovered since our conversations. So with that, here we go. I was initially hesitant about speaking at today's presentation for a few reasons. First, most of what I know about the program I have learned from my research on the internet and from speaking with today's speakers and presenters. Although my father and uncles were participants in the program, they rarely spoke about it and their feelings regarding it. Secondly, there is quite a bit of information regarding the inhumane treatment the Braceros experienced while they were going through the recruitment and the screening process. Lastly, how these men were received and treated varied widely between states and individual camps. I did not want to focus on the negative, but I wanted to learn more about the positive outcomes of the program. And Fred and Tom encouraged me to dig a little deeper. I found that candle that shed some light on some much needed aspects of the story on the Bracero experience. This story is about hard work and struggle. The story regarding the Braceros' contributions to this country and its economy and communities has remained largely untold, with the exception of personal stories shared by families and through venues such as today's presentation, and now through special programs focused on preserving and sharing a more complete story of our community's cultural history. By now you have probably learned that the Bracero Program was created through a series of bilateral agreements between Mexico and the United States in response to the reduction in the available labor force due to the impact of the number of people who served in World War II. The program was initiated in 1942 and it sunset in 1964. During its time, it allowed over 4.4 million men from Mexico to come to the United States to work through farm, ranch, and railroad contracts. Initially, the program was set to end at the end of World War II when the GIs returned home. However, most of these men did not want to work in the fields and found employment in higher paid occupations. Brazos, or arms in Spanish, or more specifically, strong arms, was used as a basis for the name for the program to identify with the strong arms needed to work in labor. Recruiters advertised in Mexico's rural areas to attract men who were willing to travel to the U.S. for farming, ranching, and railroad work. The recruiters examined the men's hands, looking for calluses as proof and evidence and to ensure that they were capable of hard work. The men were screened for any criminal records as well. The program was administered by the U.S. Department of Labor. It required that the men receive specific benefits such as minimum wage, less than $1 a day for 10 to 12-hour shifts, housing, and mediators to solve or resolve issues. Some states had individuals who met with the Braceros and helped with complaints and disputes. The men were transported from large Mexican cities such as Guadalajara or Mexico City or Guanajuato by bus and trains. They were taken to screening stations, such as the main one outside of El Paso, Texas, which has historically been the point of entry for most immigration from Mexico. They were processed in buildings located just outside of El Paso in the town of Socorro at the Rio Vista Center. Here, they were given a health screening, which, although deemed necessary, was considered humiliating to many of the men. They were stripped of clothing, sprayed for lice with DDT, and examined. They were then issued identification cards and assigned to contracts with farms, ranches, and railroad companies. They were then transported to their assignment via bus or train. The men were sent mostly to Midwest and southern states, such as California, Washington, Texas, Montana, Michigan, and Arkansas. The Braceros' work was hard. They often started their day at 3 to 4 in the morning and finished between 4 to 6 p.m. at sunset. They used tools such as the short-handled hoe and were bent down working the fields, or the beet knife to harvest and clean the sugar beets, for example. Some men felt that although they suffered, it still allowed them an opportunity to save money and send home to their families. Acceptance of the Braceros was largely dictated on where they worked. One of the worst was Eastern Texas, due to significant discrimination as it was more aligned with the Southern Deep South culture. At the time, it was not unusual to see signs in restaurants which stated, "No Mexicans, no colored, no dogs allowed." Texas's participation in the program was eventually revoked due to the widespread exploitation of the Braceros. In other parts of the Southwest, there were more Spanish-speaking members in the communities, and they were familiar with the Mexican culture. As such, the Braceros were welcomed and held in higher esteem for their contributions to the state's economy. California has a long history of inviting and using Mexican nationals to fill needed gaps in its labor force. Actually, both my grandfathers were granted resident alien visas or green cards in the 1920s and 30s to work on the railroad and in the tin and copper mines in Corona in Southern California. The Bracero Program was strongly supported by Dixon's agricultural community. By 1961, there were about 10 Bracero camps in the Dixon area, and we had approximately 1,600 men assigned to those camps. My father participated in the program for about 3 years. He worked in Salinas, and then Dixon, and then Washington, and then returned back to Dixon, where he decided to settle down because it was where he felt the most welcomed. He also ended up bringing his brother and his cousin to join him in Dixon and their families. While my father rarely spoke about the program or provided any specific information regarding his experience with it, and maybe that was his focusing on the positive and overlooking the hardships, he chose instead to share stories about his relationship with the farmers, who treated him with respect and compassion. Benetti, Anderson, Nishikawa were more than names. They are part of our family history. The Bracero Program was a complicated relationship between the men who participated in it and the program itself. It was as complicated as any relationship between two people. It was imperfect and occasionally troubling, but it also provided opportunities and personal rewards. It was said that while the GIs fought for us in the war, the Braceros fed the U.S. and its allies. Our next presenters will provide us with a perspective of what some of these men experienced on a more local and personal level. My father and uncles did not live in either of their families' camps, but I firmly believe that their experience with the Garcia family, who ran the Garcia camp where they were assigned, was very similar to what you will hear from Fred and Tom. Next, I'd like to present Tom Galindo. Thank you.
nice to see a nice crowd out today. Like to ask one question. How many of you come from a family that was associated with the Bracero? I know, there you go. There you go. So you understand pretty much what happened during those times. What Maria said, we had a meeting just last week at my house, and we talked about the way these Braceros were brought in across the border. I was raised from a child, from 5 years old, up until the Bracero program was over. I saw these men come in to we used to pick them up at Yuba City. That's where they were bussed into, bring them out to our labor camp where they were fed, and we'll get into that later. But I had never heard, ever, in all those years, of any of them being traumatized or unhappy with the way they were brought in. And what it makes me feel like is these men were brought in here on their own will. They were brought in to help their families. They came in here, we were talking about, oh my God, they got 10 cents a lug box for picking tomatoes. Well, a can of Pepsi was 10 cents. Gasoline was 15, 20 cents a gallon. So if you figure all that out, these guys were making a lot of money. And not only that, they weren't paying taxes, they weren't paying Social Security, they weren't paying anything that the American people were paying for. It was a win-win situation. All of our men were, it was during wartime, our people were working in shipyards, they were busy. And yes, the farmers needed help, but the Braceros also needed help. So when they came here, it was a wonderful opportunity for them. As you can see right now, what's happening at our borders. Thousands, millions of people want to get across that border. Why? For the opportunities that they have. My dad started, this wasn't something that my dad didn't understand about the hard work and the heartache and the trouble that you went through. My dad was born in Kansas. He was born to a very poor family. He was a transit worker. He, at 13 years old, him and his older brother, started riding the freight trains, going from state to state, working with a short handle hoe. There was nobody that that I saw, of all the crews we had, that could out-thin my dad with a hoe. That guy was magic. And the reason the short handle hoe was brought into effect is during that time, we didn't have the mechanical ability to plant plants the way they needed to be planted. When we planted sugar beets, we planted them just all together like that. Well, a sugar beet is no different than a tree. You don't plant a tree butt to butt. You plant them 40 feet apart. The sugar beets had to be thinned and to single every 4 to 6 inches. So you had to hoe, and with the left hand, pull that double out, and hoe and pull the triplet and hoe. So it took a lot of practice, and these people were never pushed. The crew would start across the field. If there was a lagger, a guy that wasn't as fast, they would bring up, go back, get one of the faster guys, help that guy catch up. So it wasn't like they had a whip back there that everybody had to go even. Everybody has their own pace. So, you know, that part, I have a hard time saying, well, you know, I was out there, I watched them. To me, when they got here, they had a nice place to stay, they had good food, they had, you know, my mother did all the cooking for up to 400 people a day. 3 meals a day, 400 people she cooked for. And these guys, I'm sorry?
Dad did breakfast.
My dad would get up at 4 in the morning and do breakfast. This thing about getting up at 4 in the morning and going out to work is not true because you couldn't see at 4 in the morning. You had to wait till 6 o'clock, 6:30. You couldn't see to hoe that meat. So you had to wait till 6 or till the sun came up. And they'd work, yeah, they're 10, 12 hours a day, whatever it took, whatever the farmer. I mean, I'm not saying that that it was a perfect thing, but it was the way it had to be done, because that's the way farming was done then. Everything was done by hand. Almonds were knocked by hand. Tomatoes were picked by hand. Sugar beets were thinned, and the weeds were pulled. We didn't have the chemicals to stop the weeds from growing. You know, I grew tomatoes. I was a farmer for 50 years. My dad died when he was 50 years old, and I took over the business at 25 years old. And I just retired 3 years ago. So I was in this business a long time. And I watched the mechanical part of this business transition from hand-picking tomatoes to mechanical picking tomatoes, which took 22 to 25 people on a machine, to now a machine that doesn't have any people, harvest without people, and harvest 25, 30 loads a day. When we used to, with 22 people, we used to harvest 4 loads a day. So the mechanics of all this has just made this whole, you know, if you want to look at this Bracero thing and think it's an ugly thing, it wasn't. It gave opportunities to a lot of people. And those people, when they did become citizens or got their green card, they didn't want to work out in the fields either. They went to work. They went to work in construction. They went to work at the meat plants. They went to work. You couldn't get these guys to go out in the field anymore. They didn't want to work there, and I don't blame them. My dad didn't. When my dad got married, luckily he married a wife that had family in San Francisco. My dad went to San Francisco and worked for a company, and he became a forklift driver. But after a few years of doing that, his heart was still back on the ranch. So that's when he came back and started this labor camp, and worked for Jim Fulmore, which is actually Bob Gill's uncle. If any of you know Bob Gill, it was Roy Gill's second uncle, and my dad went to work for him. And what they did was, when my grandfather had that camp, Pete Garcia, when he built the camp on the east side of town, my dad took over that camp. And that's how Pete Garcia was my grandfather. So that's how that transition made. And then my dad wanted to expand, so he went and built his own camp. And then started building it up to 400 people. So, you know, and also this isn't over. You know, just because there's no Braceros, we still have the migrant labor camps, which are doing exactly the same thing as the Bracero camps did, except they leave the Bracero out of it. The camps, start to use my hands here, I'm getting excited. The camps are open only during harvest season. They're open to people that, you know, from Mexico. Supposedly, they're only supposed to go like 100 miles away to Salinas or down in the Southern Valley and work there, and then come back to this harvest. They don't do that. They work here, they're 3 to 4 months, they go to Mexico, and they draw unemployment. And that's what they do. I know these people. I've had people work for me. They have no desire to work from October till May when the camp opens. So, you know, what better opportunity is that? You come here, you work for 3 or 4 months, you go to Mexico, you live a nice life, you draw unemployment the whole time. It's a game. They have people here signing the unemployment cards, sending them to the unemployment sends the money to the guy sends it to Mexico. This is such a common practice. So these guys, all I can say is they got a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to come into the United States. They knew what was here. They used to tell me, there was a little saying about in the Mexican community that go to California and just sweep up the money. Just sweep it up. There's money all over California. All you got to do is sweep it up. So it's hard work, you know. We still did hard work. I worked hard all my life. Not on a short handle hoe. The long handle hoe was developed later when also the mechanics were to where you could plant a sugar beet 4 inches apart. So you didn't need to be so precise. So you could walk along and not need that short handle hoe. That's why it went from short handle to long handle. Not because the guys, you know, they felt sorry for the guy, because, no, it wasn't needed. It wasn't needed, so they went to the long handle hoe. That's why. But, and they're living, you know, where they lived out. I had my friends from school, Bert Caldwell right there, that they used to love to come out at lunchtime because the burritos were wonderful. And he said my sisters were beautiful too, but I don't believe that. But we used to help people come and buy our lunches because they were good. They were, you know, and so they had a nice place to sleep. They had all the latest facilities. They had toilets just like we do in our own homes, but they also had their way of living. There was not a toilet lid on one of those toilets. And the reason was, is because they would stand on the toilet.
Yeah.
They wouldn't sit on the toilet.
Yep.
Because that was their way in Mexico. They would, so you'd go in there and there'd be half a dozen ones broken, you'd put it, finally you'd just take them all off. Because they would not, and the toilet paper, and I don't mean to be gross or anything, but it was not in the toilet, it was on the ground. So, you know, this had to be dealt with every day. Cleaning out all this, sweeping the barracks, making sure, and the food line, it was cafeteria style. They got all the food they wanted. They were never turned down. In the morning, my dad got up at 4 in the morning. They got eggs, they got beans. Beans was a staple. Beans was every meal. They got bread, they got milk, they got, I call it mush, but it was oatmeal. Yeah, and potatoes. They got a regular breakfast. At lunchtime, they got 6 burritos. They got a little bottle of juice. They got an orange or an apple, and that was lunch. And they also got bread in the morning. They didn't get tortillas, they got bread. And in the evening, we had a 50-gallon drum that I used to make of Kool-Aid, and I'd mix it with a big stick, like a boat, you know, and put a big cube of ice. And they had water on their tables. Again, they had, you know, and then they got 6 more tortillas, and more tortillas if they wanted. Freshly baked corn tortillas, right off the machine. These weren't bought. These were cooked right there, and within an hour or two, they were served. So they had water basins. I just think that, you know, we had a great time. My sisters and I, my brother, we used to go out and play baseball with the guys. You know, they were just normal guys. We had fun with them. You know, on the Sundays, they'd lay around I don't know, like I said, we grew up. We had a house, 2 stairs down was a kitchen, and the dining hall. The dining hall was not quite twice as big as this, but to support 400 people, you know, it had to be big. So, you know, I don't know. I just have my own ideas, and like I said, I find it hard that, you know, and it's not that I don't believe what your father, your uncle say. Honestly, but I think everybody felt differently about the way they came in and what they got on the other end. And like, maybe I don't want to repeat myself, but our young soldiers that went in, joined the Army and the Navy, they had to go through the same procedure. They had to be checked for diseases, lice, everything. They had to go through the same procedure, yet they were going to give up their lives. They were going to give up their lives. They weren't going over there to sweep up money. They were going over there to fight for their country, not be given something. And I'll tell you what, I think I would much rather go on the end of a short-handled hoe than to go someplace and have a Vietnamese shooting at me. So, you know, I think it was a win-win situation for everybody. The farmers needed it, we needed it. Yes, they did feed the war effort. They were needed desperately. Somebody had to do it. So that's what I remember. I remember it being a good thing, not a bad thing. And they didn't have to come here. And a lot of the people that got to the border had to have money to get to the border. So a lot of them, many of them, came from families that had money. Because the people that were on the border, yeah, they could step right on the bus. The people that were back in the middle of Mexico or way into Mexico had to pay their way to get to the border. So you had to have money to get there. These people were not poor people. They were people, ordinary Mexican people that saw, they saw a wonderful opportunity to go sweep up money. And that's what they came for, and we're thankful for them. We're so thankful for them. I think without them, I can't imagine what would have happened. But I'm proud, and I just want to say that I am, my father was born in Kansas, but Mexican descent. My mother was born in Colorado. I was born here. I am totally 100% Mexican. So if anybody can respect Mexicans, I can, because I am 100% Mexican and proud of it. Thank you very much.
They told me in public speaking in high school you need props, so I brought a prop. Where do you begin something like this?
Can you raise the mic, please?
Down below.
It's down on the mid pocket.
Really,
Maybe.
Better? Better, okay. Okay, I think I need to start from the perspective of where Tom left off in respect to the Braceros and the Mexican people that did the work, in the fact that my dad told me when I was about the age that he built his camp, don't ask anybody to do something that you won't do yourself. And in that regard, he had great respect for the people that worked for us. I say for us, we were a small camp in relationship to a commercial operation. We did share our men with Elmer and Kenny Schroeder and Neat Sawyer, mainly because they were close and they didn't have a large acreage, so we could cover that. And it leads into a lot of the, I kind of want to cover how that went about, how they did it. They came into Yuba City, like Tom mentioned, and there were associations all over the state that were in different areas, and you contracted the number of people that you wanted for 6-week periods, and you had to guarantee them work for those 6 weeks, barring any bad weather. Bad weather would be something to mitigate that demand. Otherwise, they need to work. They were here to work. They wanted to work. And so we picked these men up at the start of the contract, bring them into the camp, and we'd give them a number. And the reason that that came about for us was if you had 60 men, you probably had 10 of them by the name of Jose. And you had another 10 that were Miguel. And so it was a lot easier to give them a number to keep them individualized when you were paying them. When they were in the back, I suggest you look at those what we call claims, the boxes stacked up in the field, and write their number on those boxes. And when they got done picking out the claim, they would call for the checker, and he'd come and he'd punch the 20 boxes, 30 boxes, whatever the amount of boxes, and then he'd go on down the field and pick another claim. And when he was done with that, they'd call the checker, well, he's got 20 boxes and he's got another 30, so he's at 50. And that's how he was, what he was paid by that day, the number of boxes he picked. I'm not sure exactly, I thought about it, and I don't remember exactly how the pay was, whether they worked by the hour when they were thinning and hoeing. When they're picking fruit, it's piece rate. And you had to guarantee them a minimum wage, whatever that was. Because you'd have individuals that might pick 40 boxes a day. You had in the same field, the same fruit and what have you, you might have an individual pick 75, as many as 100 boxes a day. And so, I'm trying to think about some of this stuff that wasn't covered. From our standpoint, I think our camp was born out of the situation where my dad was an entrepreneur in some regards. It was an era in Dixon, in the area. He came to Dixon and started farming in 1946. So by the program had already started. He didn't have a labor camp. He used Carl Hahn's labor camp, which is the Cactus Corners. There's no remnants other than his personal residence is still there. But all of the camp buildings and everything, like so many of the labor camps around, ours included, you would never know it was ever existed in the same place that today. But I lost my train of thought here. But
welcome to the club.
To go back to how some of the operations, so when these men come to the camp, they were issued these numbers, and they were also issued their blankets and their mattress and their mattress cover and da 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 da. And as I recall, we paid them, I want to say, twice a month. I'm not guaranteeing that was the case, but we paid in cash. And in talking to Tom in our meeting, we paralleled. Practically everything we did was the same general way. And my dad would go in and get cash and take it to the camp the payday. We had one new building that we built. I should back up. Our camp was barracks that were sold at Travis Air Force Base. Was after the war that we built our camp. About 1955, 56, I believe we built it. And he got 5 of those barracks buildings. They were approximately 20 by, I want to say, 30, 40 feet long. We used 3 of them for sleeping quarters, and 2 of them we put together, and that was the mess hall and the kitchen. And we operated almost parallel to what Tom explained of the food, the kind of food, the quantity of the food, and I think these people that came to our area, Dixon, were treated very, very well in regards to the abundance of what they had to eat, the way they were treated, and how they were appreciated. And I might add, they did add a lot to our community in our local movie theater on Saturdays would present an all Spanish-speaking program. It gave them an opportunity to maybe have a couple of beers that they didn't have because nobody furnished, that I know of, any alcohol at the labor camps. That's just asking for trouble. And we didn't need that kind of trouble. So they might have walked a straight line coming to town out of Pete Garcia's, but they were a little bit woozy going home. Which, if this prop has a meaning, during our tenure, probably about 3 years into it, they mandated that we give them individual drinking cups, because at first it was a milk can, 10-gallon milk can with baling wire around the beer can hanging on the handle. Everybody used the same can, they dip it in the water and they drink, and nobody, we drank too out of it. But so what my dad did is he went to Oakland and he bought a couple of whiskey kegs, barrels. He put these on a trailer because this afforded us a better volume and an easier way to move this stuff, because we used to have to move it down the road with as they picked, and you'd have to go back to pick up, load it up, and move it on down the road, set it up. And so when this program came out of individual drinking cups, we didn't want the field all messed up with paper cups, so my dad said, we got a project. So this was perfect solution. An aluminum can with their number on the bottom. And he built a box on top of the keg up here, faced it this way, had dowels in it. There's your number. Of course, they didn't adhere to that, but it was there, and we covered the situation. But to back up, I'm not that good at this, hopping from place to place. Go back to payday. It wasn't long after he started paying in cash, he thought, my God, I'm a sitting duck. So he went and bought himself a cannon, a 357 Magnum revolver, and he set it on his seat of his car when he went to the bank, because there was this 7 miles or so out of town, and the word gets around you're carrying that much cash. Back in that day, you might be a target. Well, come to find out, I think Tom's dad did the same thing. And anyway, we'd pay in cash, and immediately we had like a little commissary that we'd open after the meals in the evening, and sell them cigarettes and stamps and envelopes and toothpaste, toothbrush. They couldn't go to town that often, so you tried to make it convenient to get some of the things, you know, that you need. And so we'd get done paying them, and they'd immediately come back. And they'd leave the envelope open, they'd have their letter or whatever, and we'd write on there how much money they wanted in the name of the person on the address to go to. And then the next day my mom would take that to the bank and buy money orders to that amount to that person, send it registered mail. And to my knowledge, over the period of time, I can't hardly remember any that weren't delivered. So the system worked there. Those fellas, and believe you me, as hard as they worked for their money, if that money didn't get home to their family, they would have told us. And so the program did work for the families in Mexico. And like they said, there wasn't any deductions or anything. We didn't charge them anything to do it. We just did it as a service because they couldn't go to town and do it. And I think over time, and it didn't take too much time, an owner of property and business in Mexico doesn't do any of the everyday labor. So when they came here and they saw, because we were individual farmers, so many of the people that they didn't have farming operations that ran the camps. They were commercial camps. And when they saw the fact that my dad, myself, and anybody associated directly with the farm worked as hard as anybody else, they had more respect for us than as we did for them. And I think that pretty much covers the situation as far as us as an independent individual that had a labor camp. And like I said, we brought in the Elmer Schroeder and Kenny Schroeder and Neat Sawyer to help the system work and to be able to guarantee that time that they contracted for the labor. I might add one thing. We would, over a period of time, there were individual employees as braceros that stood out. And my dad was a close personal friend of Carl Hans, which is Cactus Corner. Frenchie, he went by Frenchie, but they traveled in Mexico extensively. But they also, Carl was a dual citizen. He came from Mexico originally. You'd never guess it, but he did. And and he knew the ways of the world and how it operated. And they would go to the council in Guadalajara, and they would, for select individuals, and sponsor these fellas for green cards. And over the years, not just the Bracero program, but individually, but a lot of them came through the Bracero program. And those fellas, and I don't know how many we did, but it was upwards of probably 20, 30 of those men that we got green cards for over the period of his farming. And what's interesting is, like Tom mentioned, I believe, so many of those individuals, when they were able to get a green card, there was no hold on them to stay in agriculture. And eventually, as the need for them dwindled, this gave them the opportunity to move within the society and gain better employment, which meant better situation for their families, and in a lot of regards gave them the ability to sponsor their own families and bring them to the United States. And it's been interesting to watch that in our town transpire, and how they went from that to a better job, but then the kids were educated here and they got a better job than the dad or the mom, and now their kids have improved over that. So in that regard, it makes you feel good. That's about it.
So you have, I think, an excellent spectrum of perspective, and that's really what Tom and Fred convinced me about. It did vary. And yes, the program itself, the administration had some horrible things about it, and other states had horrible stories. I think this community is exceptional in how we treated men who came up. So I'm really happy to have had that whole picture, the wide picture, presented to you today. With that said, if you have any questions, any specific questions, we'll take questions now and see what we can do to answer them.
Once the labor camp decided how many people they needed, what was the process for getting, say you needed 40 people, what was the process to get those 40 people?
I think Fred mentioned you'd go up to the Farm Bureau.
Or was it like a
I
distribution?
didn't go into detail, and I kind of wanted to, but these associations were clearinghouses. Actually, we dealt with Northern California Growers Association, right, Tom?
That's correct. Yeah, I didn't
And
say-
it really started here in Dixon, in an office right off the spur railroad that used to go down to the scales. What's there now? Nothing. Well, right across the street almost. Okay, I think the need got enough, and then there was a lot of trading back and forth when we didn't need them. They needed them in the summertime, like June, July, to pick up north. They had a lot of prunes, they had a lot of peaches, they had a lot of apricots in the Yuba City area, and it was perfect because we use them through. We plant beets as early as February. And so as soon as they came up and were ready, you started thinning and you started weeding and you did all of this. And that kind of waned a little bit in the May and June. And then this other opportunity opened up for them, so you could, it might have been a new contract, but you sent them back. And the clearinghouse was that association. And so what you did is you contacted them, say, I have the need for 40 men. And so they'd get the 40 men and they'd call you up and say, okay, they're here, come pick them up. Because they didn't have any facility there to feed them and all of that. You'd hightailed it up there and got them and brought them home and fed them immediately and settled them in. And they might have started working the next day. And so that's kind of the way that transpired.
It sounds like it.
And then, of course, our big demand, probably the peak of the thing was harvest time, because all the tomatoes were picked by hand. And that was a period in the Dixon area too, that a lot of the grain, a lot of the land that had been used for dry land grain production was being leveled to grade, wells being drilled, and they started row cropping. And the row cropping cash crops were sugar beets and tomatoes mainly, and that maintained it for a long time while tomatoes are still going strong. The sugar beets left because it involved that. Sugar cane,
Somebody likes it.
corn sweeteners.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons why. That's another story.
Okay.
But these associations were all over the state, and they took care of certain areas. Clearinghouses, I guess you want to call them.
Tom, you had 400 people.
Yes.
Where are you? So you were also a clearinghouse of sorts, right?
We use the same association as they did.
So you got your people down from Yuba City, and then you divided them out
And
to
like-
the
just
farms.
Like Fred was saying, and when my dad moved to this new camping facility, the reason he did, because Jim Fulmore was like Fred, he was a farmer. My dad wasn't a farmer. We were commercial, just did the work commercially. We didn't farm. And Jim Fulmore had his own ranch and had his own people and had his own facilities. So we had to move from there, and my dad had to build his own. And then he got new customers. Jerry Fielder, there was a lot of the local farmers that would go to him. That's why ours was so big, was because we had multiple
Different ones.
farmers. And then one farmer would want 40 people, one would want 60, one would want 100. And so we would facilitate the place to keep them. And as far as I knew, once the harvesting was done, sometimes we'd mix the people back and forth. If one farmer wasn't using them and the other one needed some help, we'd go back and forth. And so my dad was kind of the dispatcher of these people working around.
Right.
And so that was our job,
Right.
just to take care of the people. And really these people were here, the farmer paid my dad. It was like, I think like $3 a day per person. And that gave them a place to sleep, 3 meals a day, a ride to work for $3. But again, we're talking that back then, you could buy a Pepsi for 10 cents. So the price, my dad was making a lot of money at that, even at $3 a day. But that was part of the deal. We just had more customers. That's why ours was much bigger.
Right.
And we did eventually have Fred's people. I remember him as a customer.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were one of our customers. Bill Schroeder was one of our customers, Bill Schroeder's dad. So, we had a lot of local customers, and and I didn't bring up the fact that we also, at our camp, we had a doctor's office type. We'd have a doctor come in 2 or 3 times a week, and we had all the facilities there. It looked just like any doctor's office you go into. And we were the only one in the whole, Davis, Winters area that would have this doctor come in. In case one of the guys got hurt or got sick, the doctor would come, or he would just be there. So we had that facility for him. So these people, like I was saying, they had a lot. We also had a commissary, just like Fred did. We had a little pool table in there. We had, things for them to do. So, but yeah, the reason we had 400 people is because we had customers.
Tom,
Yes.
something came to mind, and and I can't remember for sure, did you ever have visitation of the priest and have mass there? Because
The priest would come out,
almost
yes.
100% of them
Yes.
were Catholic.
Yeah, we
And-
never had
and
mass,
It seemed
so-called
like
mass,
they did that.
but they did that. The
Yeah.
father with the priest would come out and talk to the guys, just freely
Yeah.
and talk to the guys. But we never did, as far as I can remember, have you think we did? We might have. Yeah, my sister says we might have. I was off. Yeah, oh, no.
Very rarely, very rarely,
Yeah.
very rarely. Those Spanish speaking priests.
That's
I
right.
remember that.
We did have a Spanish-speaking priest, and he was from
You're making me look bad.
Sorry. You're old and you don't remember.
So, yeah, so, what my sister said, we grew up, we saw all this. And, so, anyway, if there's any other questions, yes.
So growing up in the sixties as a kid, I remember some of the migrant camps. When did they start allowing like the families to come? Was it the men all the way until like?
It was only the men until they got their green cards. Then later on, they were able to fix papers for their family, to bring their family. But for the most part, you know, like Fred said, and it was perfect, but there were standouts. There were people, there were men, just like a football game or a basketball game, you always have a standout. And these standouts would, I mean, we would go after them, basically. We would say, this guy would make a great a ranch hand, tractor driver, could do anything. And that's how these guys got their papers fixed. My dad also fixed a lot of papers for a lot of guys, the standouts. A lot of them were just here to work and go home. And that's all they wanted to do. I had one of my guys, I had 3 or 4 guys that worked for me for over 25 years when I was farming. And one of my favorites, I called them my sons because they were young when they started. But he would go to Mexico, come work his 6, 7 months and go back. And I would ask him, why don't you bring your wife out? Because that wasn't the plan. The plan was to work until he was 62 years old, could get his Social Security, go back to Mexico, and live his life. But he died 2 days before he turned 62. Can you imagine? Yeah. And he was absolutely a wonderful, wonderful man. On our property, yeah. And the year before, we had just gone to Guadalajara to see his family, and we were invited to his son's wedding, and wonderful trip. So, yeah, we were very close, very close to one.
Any more questions?
I just wanted to share a memory, Maria, if that's okay. I remember my brother and I, Terry.
Can you stand up, Tricia?
Yes.
Or why don't you come up here?
Oh, sure. My brother Terry and I, Terry was older than I was. Terry, as you might remember, passed about 20 years ago. But Terry and I came to Dixon from Alaska, where we were both born. I was about 3.5, and Terry was about 5.5, 6. And, you know, we moved, my mom married George and Anderson, and we moved on to what they call the home place, where the Andersons homesteaded our first 160 acres. Sorry about that. And I remember as a child, Terry and I, when we first came here, I think Walter and my grandfather and my great uncle Bud built the migrant camp which was on Pedrick Road, right across from Peter Tim's place. And I remember my mom, who had a lot of foresight, would walk through the fields from Robin to get over to the migrant camps. And I appreciate your question, because I wasn't sure I was remembering correctly, but I remember the buildings were green, and I remember there being children there receiving schooling. And I remember mothers being there. So I was curious about your question, but it was important to my mom that Terry and I, and then Emily, my younger sister, you know, spend time there and interact. with the children and make friendships with them. And so that's just a fond memory and in honor of my mom who passed, many of you know, about a year and a half ago. Yeah.
I can answer that question.
Mhm.
That was my grandfather's camp.
Oh,
Garcia.
well,
And
what do I
the
know?
children you saw there and the women you saw there were my aunts and my uncles.
Okay.
It was kind of like a little commune there.
Uh-huh.
There was-
How did it end up in our hands?
And we used to go there every weekend, and my grandmother had a monkey, and we'd climb
Uh-huh.
trees, and we loved it there.
Yeah, it was
That's
really
why you saw
fun.
kids and monkeys
Yeah.
and women, and those were all just family.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. As kids,
That's why you saw women and children.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, oh. Okay. Come on up. All right. Introduce yourself, Mr. Casares.
Hi, my name is Javier Casares, better known as Harvey. But I remember my father came as a Bracero in the programs, and we talking about Frenchie's Camp. That's where my dad went, and all that kind of stuff. And my dad's from the cactus state of Mexico.
Yeah.
So who do you think planted the cactus?
Cactus.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so my dad worked there, and my dad, like he was talking about, get somebody to sponsor somebody. My dad worked for in the camp. They were out there hoeing weeds, and I don't know. You guys remember Bill Leiter? Yeah. And so my dad got impressed by Bill Leiter, and he sponsored my father to get his green card. And then my dad went to work for George Berry. I remember going to the ranch when I was a little kid, and Fred was just, God, you were just a teenager. But no, I just want to say that, and my father, what he says about taking advantage, not advantage, but the opportunity to grow. And my dad got out of farming and went to work for Armored Meat Company. So I just want to say, I do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
Yeah, no, that's what I meant when I mentioned the Vanettis. Mr. Vanetti, John Vanetti, ended up being my brother's godfather. I mean, that's just how it happened. They became family. But the last thing I want to say is that Darla Ware and I are putting together, we finally finished up all the pieces of the display that will be featured at the museum. It's one of the new displays. We do rotation. So we'll have a display, and it'll have more pictures and things if you want to go by and take a look at it. I think May 5th is the launch date for that display, so please go by. Yes. You're welcome to come by. If you have pictures, and this is something I tried to get before I did the display. We had a hard time coming up with pictures, and today we have pictures, but it's like, okay, it's too late, guys. But no, if you have pictures or anything that has to do with the braceros, please drop them off or just email us a copy, just a PDF, and I'll see what I can do about having it printed, and maybe I want to start something there so people like us can share. This is a community, and when people remember things, I was looking at them to see if I recognize any of the pictures, the faces that Tom and Fred brought, and someone else brought. Anyway, Bill. So Bill brought a whole bunch of them. So yes.
I got here a little late. We had people coming from Missouri for their picnic, old friends and school friends. And so their plane was delayed, and so I didn't get here in time. I don't know what was covered, but I have one fond memory of the Bracero Program.
Can you come up here so we can get you on film for your memory?
Can you hear me? Now we need to film me?
Yeah, this way they can film you.
I didn't bargain for that.
You're a celebrity now.
You're a celebrity now, yeah.
State your name.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
My name is Stuart Rao. And I'm 91 years old, so I've been around a while. And I have a fond memory of the Braceros. One of them was that when they loaded the bus to go home, the one fella had a small TV in one hand and a sack of beans over the other shoulder. And so they carried what they could and what was important, I think, home with them. But the ones I saw, I mean, they were hard workers and really an asset to the whole agricultural community while they were here. But anyway, I'm sorry that I'm late and I missed part of the meeting, but anyway, I'm glad to be here in a lot of different ways. Just
Oh, want something? Okay, yeah. Okay, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jess Jones. I got a couple of things to add. If you Google the short handle hoe, it is legally outlawed in the state of California for good reasons. You use that hoe for two reasons. Because you could do finer work. It was a backbreaker. And he said the foremen could see if you're working or not. If you were standing up, you weren't working. If you're down here, you were. And that was the two reasons that they really liked the short handle hoe. I worked on a Bracero crew picking tomatoes. I didn't pick tomatoes, I loaded the trucks. And Tom says there was always an outstanding guy. We had one. Most of the guys on the crew were just barely over 5 feet tall. And they picked like hell. But loading the truck, that was a premier job because you could make more money at it. I got there because I was the owner's son. There was a tall Mexican fella. He and I were the only ones that lasted the season. Everybody, the other two guys, they came and they would not quit. And you could see them staggering. They were picking a 50-pound bag box up and they over the head onto the truck. And after a few days of that, they were just shot. But they wouldn't ask to be relieved. And finally, I'd go ask them, do you want to go back and pick? And they would. And then another guy would come and last a couple of days. But that was part of that job. I was young and strong, and the other guy was. Not only would we load 8 trucks a day, but he'd go and pick. And in my memory, some days he'd pick 150 boxes of tomatoes and load 8 trucks. Now that was a man.
All right. Thank you. This has been recorded, and it is our hope, and has been our hope, that these presentations will be posted on our website. I know we've been slow in getting that to go, but maybe soon. So when that happens, if anyone missed it, or if you know someone that would like to hear it, it will be posted eventually, and we'll send something out through the email to our members and let them know as well. Okay? Thank you very much.